One of the things that changed at Microsoft that made the difference was they had a new CEO and he brought a new culture. And that culture was about being competitive and being aggressive and corporate, aggression and, I've got all this information and I'm going to keep it. And information is power. It was about empowerment and sharing that information and collaborating. And you can create that environment. You don't have to be a Microsoft. You can create that any environment in a company.
Before we start today's episode, I want to address a common challenge I have observed with FP&A professionals. While Excel skills are abundant, many are not fully tapping into Power BI's capabilities to enhance their financial analysis skills. With over a decade of experience in FP&A consulting and countless training sessions conducted, my most loved training by FP&A professionals, hands down, has been my Introduction to Power BI for Financial Analysts. So, for my loyal podcast listeners, I am giving you free access to it today. Check out the link in the description below to upgrade your FP&A skills today. Thank you. Hi, Andy. First of all, many thanks for making the time to come to our podcast on FP&A Unboxed, where we are looking to actually unbox the various components of FP&A and what does future of FP&A look like and how we can make FP&A better today and where does it go in the future. So, for our listeners, Andy Cox is the founder of Optimum Value Limited, a business partnering company. That focuses on joining the dots and not counting them. I love this one, not counting the dots. He spends his time and his career at TMT, which is technology, media, and telecommunication sectors, supporting functions like marketing, technology, and product to help them make a better commercial decision making and particularly around investment. One of the key reasons why, frankly and very honestly, I'm very impressed by Andy and I would love for him to talk about his experience is the fact that Andy has spent, was it a year or a couple of years, Andy, at Microsoft? How many years were you at Microsoft?
I was there a year on a kind of maternity leave. So the woman was away for a year. So yeah.
Yeah. So we would love to hear more about your experience at Microsoft at first hand, because I think that is going to be very, very valuable for our listeners to learn more from. So over to you. Is there something you would like to add? Have I missed something to begin with?
No, that's just that I spent my career in corporate finance, and then I've decided to take those transferable skills and apply it to SMEs on a more consultancy basis going forward. And that's what Optimum Value is about. So it's basically trying to provide commercial finance to SMEs. And that's the kind of commercial experience that most SMEs don't have, whereas corporates do because they have the resources to buy in, etc. So I've kind of taken my skills and applied it to companies that don't normally have those skills. They normally have financial controllers, and rather than looking at traditional finance, I've looked at strategy and commercial finance and tried to think about things in a different way rather than just reporting and governance and control. So
yeah, no, perfect. So you spend like your entire career in TMT sector, right, with multiple different functions. So how has this experience helped you basically with your finance business partnering framework and your ways of doing finance business partnering?
The most important thing is understanding how business works. I don't think you can be an effective finance person, particularly a business partner, without actually understanding how business works and how it all fits together. So and until you actually work with different functions, you don't know how these things integrate. And I've been quite fortunate in life. Some of the positions I've had, I've seen I've covered, other than HR, I've supported most functions in a business. And so I understand how they work. And in particular in O2, I had a very good role in marketing strategy, and marketing kind of led the company at O2 and still does. And I saw something from initial idea that someone had through to developing a proposition, through to the network building the product and service, through to customer service supporting it, and all those things in between. Until you actually understand how a business works, you can't be a true business partner. And the good thing about finance, in most companies, the finance department can get a good visibility of all parts of the organization. So it's one of the unique strengths that all finance people have. They have access to other parts of the organization, which allows them to contribute more, because going back to my phrase, my strapline, which is to join the dots, not count them, that's the biggest value that finance can add going forward. So when you automate all those processes, you're not doing reporting, control, biggest value you can add is actually joining the dots. So you see something in marketing, how does that relate to technology? How does that relate to customer services? And you can be the person that joins those dots and provides that value, because other people can't see it because they're in marketing or they're in, and finance, and particularly business partners in certain companies get visibility across all these different functions. So that's probably the biggest thing I learned, and I use that to my advantage. So I kind of worked for companies that appreciated that, so we're quite happy for people to kind of be bold and challenge the norm. So most of the companies I've worked for were quite happy for individuals to challenge thinking and always think to improve, constant improve. And a lot of the tech companies are constantly improving because of the technology. So you naturally have to get used to change and see change as beneficial and see technology as beneficial. So somebody in technology, having a career in technology, it's easy to see. But if you're outside the technology world, it's not necessarily easy to see. But in the technology world, it's quite easy to see that change is something that happens. You just have to be used to it and be comfortable with it. And technology is there to provide a support. I've never seen technology as replacing people's jobs, even AI. I don't see that as replacing. And people who see this podcast, I recommend that they read The Fourth Industrial Revolution, which it's been out about 4 or 5 years, maybe a little bit longer. And even there it talks about AI, but the key thing is roles will change. Technology is there to support. And just if you just think that way and you're quite happy to change and adapt, I wouldn't worry about losing a job. It's about going in to do more value add thinking rather than kind of number crunching or reporting. The technology can take that all away from you, so you can focus on, the more value add that you add to a company. So I think they're the main things. I think the other thing that I found over having that experience in across all the different departments is it's important to have good EQ skills. So most finance people, focus on the technical skills. They get their qualifications, but they focus on technical skills. And as you business partner and as you look at other functions, what becomes more important, especially when you get more senior as well, what's important is actually building relationships with people and understanding how people work. And, so you have to understand your strengths and weaknesses, and you have to understand other people's strengths and weaknesses. And that's all about EQ, which is emotional intelligence. So I would say the other thing I've really learned is how important that is. The more you kind of look outside finance and you want to achieve overall company objectives, you've got to work with people, and that means building relationships, especially in large corporates. There's like tens of thousands of people in some of these companies, and so you only get things done by building strong relationships.
Yeah. I mean, so that is an interesting point to touch base on. And you touched it, I think, a couple of times you mentioned, right? You moved away from finance a couple of times and done a couple of roles in actually marketing and strategic partnerships. So how has that experience? So do you recommend, like, should finance people leave finance and try and do something outside finance, at least as a one or couple of years in their career? Do you think that helps? Is that only for finance business partners, or is that even if I'm going to be an accountant for the rest of my life, should I still go and do something like that? For example, if my career aspiration is to be a technical accountant, should I still go and do a role outside finance, for example?
So I would say yes, and it's always done me good. Okay. And the main thing is, even when you get into the higher echelon, I don't know if you've noticed, there are a lot of CFOs becoming CEOs, but they're actually doing, they're getting that experience the first time. They haven't been in marketing, or they've just been in finance, right? But if you've been in those roles, you're more likely to move into those roles as you get senior, because you've worked with those functions, you know how they operate. So and it's a bold move, but you don't have to do I stepped out of finance first time into marketing in 2002, and I spent 4 years there. And those 4 years that I spent there saw a company go from the bottom of the pack to market leader. And I saw things in that company develop over 4 years that I would have never, ever seen in finance. Because marketing was leading the company, I saw change in the company. I saw how you drive a company, all those types of things. And I wouldn't have seen that just sat in finance. But you don't have to be that bold. You can job shadow, or you can kind of shadow people that you work with and support in other functions to get a better understanding if you don't want to make that bold move. But I would recommend at least once or twice in your career to actually just either do a secondment, to step out into another function where you can apply your skills in that area. And the first thing that kind of hit me when I moved over to marketing is it went in '02 where I moved into marketing. It's very unusual, but the marketing people are responsible for P&L. So all their bonuses and everything else is dependent on the performance of the numbers, basically. And as a result, they are numbers orientated. They do understand that it's important, the numbers. It's not just about pretty pictures and slides and stuff. And they want to actually understand finance better. So when I went into marketing, my skills were great because they didn't see me as like the enemy, somebody in finance that always says no. I was one of them. So that's the other thing I learned, is that in most organizations, most people in other parts of the organization want to learn about finance. They're just reluctant or a little bit scared to ask. And one other thing I noticed is when I went into marketing, I was one of them. People weren't reluctant and they come up to me and said, "Oh, can you take me through this or understand that?" And that's really good. And the other thing I learned is perspective. So people in marketing have the same goals to achieve their numbers because they were responsible for P&L, So the finance people, the marketing people, they're all aligned. That's the bottom line. That's the top line. You've got to achieve it. But what's important is their perspective. They look at life in a different way. And it's just not about black and white numbers and spreadsheets. It's about wider things. So what I learned was, how important it is for a company to be customer focused. Yeah. So that's focusing on your external customer, but also focusing on your internal customer. So one of the things I learned was the CFO came in when I moved over to marketing, and he was very customer orientated. And the first thing he'd done, he got everyone in finance to stop reporting, said, switch off all the reports and let's see in a month's time what the reaction is. And he killed probably about 50% of reports because the people who didn't shout meant they weren't reading it anyway. The people who did shout said, well, why are you shouting? Oh, okay, well, all right. So that identified what the important things you were. And it needs things like that to actually start to understand what people value, etc. And it's focusing not just only on the external customer, but also the internal customer. What do your business partners need from you and how can you help them? So in summary, I would recommend, for those who are not brave enough, do some job shadowing. That's always available in large companies, but at least one or two moves in your career, but particularly if, at some stage you're a CFO and you want to get into a CEO role, it'd be invaluable, that experience.
Yeah, no, I think what you made point earlier, right? If you even go as an intern and do internships in marketing and other things, though your career is in finance, I mean, I think it's a lot of learning, and I completely relate to your point. I have supported a lot of sales and marketing functions in my time in industry as well, and they're actually open to learning about finance
They
as
are.
long as you don't make it too accounting for them and too
Exactly.
technical for them. Then they get it. They are it's
Exactly.
very simple.
So three organizations, big organizations, O2, Travelport and Microsoft, I was in that educational role. In Travelport, we developed a training course to take people through what a business case was, why it was important, and the basics of finance, the P&L, balance sheet, but in a layman's term. Did the same in O2, educated project managers, marketing, technology people. And like you said, I found that they were willing to learn. They wanted to understand that. They've got budgets to manage. They want to understand how they can increase their budget or how they can get the most out of their budget and those types of things. So in most cases, people are there to learn. And even in the big Microsoft of this world, one of the things that the MD said to me, I said, "Well, I'm only here for a year. What do you want me to focus on?" And one of the things he said was, "Can you provide some commercial finance to my account managers?" He said, "I've got, hundreds of account managers, but very few of them have commercial finance, and they have to deal with senior people. So I set up a mini course for that. So, like you, most people in organizations welcome somebody just educating them on the basics and in layman terms.
Exactly. You don't need to go into the extremes of IFRS and technical accounting and things like that. But basically, revenue minus cost is profit. It's three lines. It's not more complicated than that.
Yeah,
Okay. Don't make it into a rocket science exercise. I think
exactly.
if we as finance become, I think, respectfully but more humble. Yes, we all have a chartered and therefore we have a chip on our shoulder. But put the chip at home and go to work. Then I think it works a little bit better.
And a good example of this is in marketing. So modern marketing today and digital marketing is all about return on investment. There's more measurements, and because my son does digital marketing, there's more KPIs and measurement of digital marketing now than there's ever been. So when I supported marketing, it was quite difficult to kind of measure brand, and you had to do surveys and measure customer churn, all those things. Now, with the technology, they've got KPIs that they can measure really accurately with the data. And so when you've got massive marketing budgets that are kind of being reviewed and maybe cut in this environment we're finding ourselves in, those people who can demonstrate high rates of return and measure them are the winners. So even the marketing people want to know how to measure their spend.
And which is what we as finance should encourage them to do, right? That way, then they self-monitor themselves, makes your life a little bit easier,
It does.
essentially. So yeah, and again, you touched a very good point, which was where I was going to go with this, Andy. Of you talked about data because data is critical for you to be able to do all of this. So, what are key factors you believe are essential for creating an environment where finance business partnering can thrive, especially in the context of rapidly changing environment? Because you also touched upon, marketing has changed, finance has changed. You even started the conversation with, yes, in the future, when with AI, if roles in finance will transform. So again, can you elaborate a little bit more? And I know offline when we have spoken, you've always spoken very fondly about your time at Microsoft and how you have never used Excel at Microsoft. I want to really hear a bit more about that one. I'm sure everybody else does as well.
So Microsoft is obviously, it's got the technology and it uses the technology and it does what it says on the tin. But that doesn't mean you have to go and work for a Microsoft to develop a favorable environment. The key ingredients are, and they exist at Microsoft, but they could quite exist at some of the SMEs that I deal with, is a leadership team that has the right culture. Okay. So that's really important. So one of the things that changed at Microsoft that made the difference was they had a new CEO and he brought a new culture. And that culture was about being competitive and being aggressive and corporate, aggression and, oh, I've got all this information and I'm going to keep it. And information is power. It was about empowerment and sharing that information and collaborating. And you can create that environment. You don't have to be a Microsoft. You can create any environment in a company. So the first thing is you've got to have the right culture and leadership. If you don't have the right culture and leadership, it's going to be very difficult. Okay. The next thing is, you can't be afraid of technology because it is what it is. It's moving forward. And if you're going to be competitive and you're going to be more efficient and productive, you've got to use technology. The good thing is there are companies like Microsoft, like Sage, out there that are helping the corporates and the SMEs, etc., do that. And so if you can, as a finance person, take that leadership where it's not being taken and help bring that technology, whoever's going to provide it, into your company and champion that, you're going to look really good and, you're going to take the company forward because ultimately what it's doing is going to increase the productivity of the people that work there. It's going to make their life easier, as in they're going to do less transactional stuff and they're going to do more kind of decision making and they're going to kind of take that insight that they've found and the systems and make great decisions. So, one of the things that Microsoft's found themselves in, and all companies will get here eventually, is they've got a massive, data set which they can tap into. And, that insight is fantastic because you know exactly what the drivers are and you can measure those drivers very accurately. So there's no gut feeling in something like Microsoft. It's all insight driven. We know what's happening. We've got the data set, but it takes time to get there. But as long as you've got the mindset to say, well, I'm going to take the company in this direction, so I'm going to digitalize the processes we do. You can't live on manual processes. You've got to digitalize those processes, capture that data in a system somewhere, and then start to interrogate that information. You can start to make insightful decisions rather than gut feeling decisions.
I am going to ask one more question based on exactly what you just said, because recently I've been speaking to a few heads of FP&A for a different research project I'm doing. And I am hearing from a lot of them, at least a few of them, they see all of this, they get the point that yes, Tejas, we need automation, yes, we need all of that. But they are scared to start that digital journey or that technology change in their business. They're almost waiting for it to happen to them rather than them leading it. I mean, respectfully, in my personal opinion, I think I was quite disappointed. I mean, you are the finance people. Nobody else can change your world. You have to lead it. And
So in Microsoft, finance did lead it for the company, so they did lead it. And you have a number of CFOs that are responsible for IT. Not all companies where CFOs are responsible for IT, but they made a conscious decision for finance to own that. In owning that, you bring together other functions. I mean, finance people are not experts in sales systems or technology systems. They can talk to your colleagues and say, okay, what's the best system for us to use that feeds into this database that provides this data? And if you've got one function that's responsible for the quality of the data, which in Microsoft's case is finance, then you start to build up a picture that you feel comfortable with, and quality in gets quality out.
yeah, so you're basically saying that those finance people who are scared to start the technology transformation in their businesses, what are like two tips you would want to give them, or three tips you would give them, which would probably encourage them to start on that journey?
Well, I would say how ambitious their company is.
Okay.
So I would, ask their CFO or FD, whoever they report to, and say, well, where do you see this company in 5 years' time? Okay, where is the company ambition? Okay, that's one of the important things. And then the other thing is, owning that. There's many case studies to show the benefit of implementing technology. I think one of the challenges is, many FP&A people have financial skills, and technical skills, but they probably don't feel comfortable enough in just general technology. But you don't have to. There are companies out there that provide that. Exactly. You just have to know where you're going. Where's your end game? This is my end game. If you can explain that to a third party, or you got enough people in your company to do it yourself, but if you can explain that, in a couple of slides, this is where I want, this is my end game, they will help you get there.
You know your as is position, you know your to be position. Somebody will help you make that journey. It's not that difficult to get there.
Exactly. So there's people there to help you. All you've got to be clear on is what they've got to start with, basically the end in mind. Where are they in 5 years' time? What does the end look like? That's fine. You share that with the people you're working with, partners you're working with, and they will develop the technology, the systems, the links, whatever it is behind the scenes to do it. And it's some cases it's not, it's not easy. It's your journey you've got to go on. But there are companies out there that make it a lot easier. So the Microsoft this world obviously work in the corporate space, and they integrate all the systems to the point where they don't even have to integrate their workspace. Doesn't even have to integrate with another Microsoft product. They've made it so it can integrate with a competitor's product.
Yeah,
So they can go to someone and say, oh, well, you got that competitive A there. Well, our work stack here can integrate into that. So you can leave that and we'll develop that. And I mean, that's fantastic, because then the customer doesn't feel like, oh my God, I'm putting all my eggs in one basket. And it all talks to one another.
yeah. I mean, and with Fabric and stuff like that today, right? You can take data from all these different disparate systems and still bring it all together
Exactly.
in one singular structure format, and then basically explode from there, which is fantastic.
Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. So, how can finance professionals balance? So, this one is very interesting for me, right? I mean, financial controls are important. We all, as chartered, recognize that yes, controls are relevant. Otherwise, you will land up in prison. But balancing that with strategic demand for strategic modeling, insights, decision making, things like that. So yes, controls are much more about backward looking and making sure that you're doing the right things and stuff like that. But then there is, okay, let's take some risk, let's do something new, let's do. How do you manage that as a finance professional when you're going through your career essentially?
I think it depends on where the company is in its journey. I mean, you ultimately are not going to get away with control and reporting until you've got a robust system in place that basically provides that. So, traditionally, finance people were all about control and reporting and regulation. Yeah. There's still regulation, but the control and reporting bit as technology comes in, doesn't have to be someone on a spreadsheet all night, producing stuff or even, sending out reports that nobody reads and stuff. I mean, in Microsoft, different functions have access to the data and they can access that data. So they don't necessarily have to go through finance. So, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a balancing act. It depends where there's a journey. And if you don't go on the kind of journey where you're developing your technologies and you're developing your process and things, your finance people will ultimately still be in that control reporting evolution. And to be quite honest, they're a danger of being left behind. And if they're any good, they won't stay with you because they'll know that the future of their career is dependent on developing their skill set. And like I said at the beginning of this podcast, is change is inevitable and it's getting quicker. You just have to be happy with change and you have to go on that journey. So I don't think it's something you work in parallel. You have to develop the company. What's important, you have the right mindset. So your mindset's not about control and saying no to your marketing department and all this type of stuff. It's about how can I support the people in this organization? How can I grow the organization? What's happening in the bigger world outside? Are we doing the right thing? Do I need to challenge people rather than just the status quo? So it's that mindset. If you've got the right mindset, you can take any organization where it is in the journey and move it along that journey. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I get it. I mean, I've been speaking to some of the other people as well, and we've been talking the same thing that basically culture is the ground in which you put the right seeds of mindset for basically the right behavior to grow. Otherwise, the behavior doesn't grow because the culture doesn't allow the mindset to
And I've
behave.
seen that in two companies I work for. I've seen it in O2. I joined O2 when it's called BT Cellnet, and it was in a very poor state. And a new team came in, and a particular individual that I've always followed in my career, she's a chief marketing officer, changed the culture in the organization. And because it was marketing led, she changed the culture out of 400 people in marketing, and that spread. And she's done the same at Sage. She's now stepped down, but she was chief marketing officer at Sage, and she did the same thing. She developed a culture which can take 3, 4, 5 years to develop, but
Absolutely.
once it's there forever. O2 has got the same culture it was 20 years ago when I worked for it, and once you've got that culture in there, it's difficult to replicate. It's something that is a competitive advantage. And I saw the same thing when I went to Microsoft. I mean, I've worked for companies that say, oh, I'm customer focused and all this type of stuff. And you think, no, you're not. I know what a customer focused organization looks like. So when I went to Microsoft, I thought, this reminds me of O2, this environment where people are empowered to make decisions and get on with stuff, and that takes time to build, but it's got to be the foundation for developing the company. It's got to have the right culture.
No, definitely. I completely agree on that one. 120%, right? According to you, what are the most common challenges that finance business partners face and how can they overcome them?
So I would say understanding their customers, their internal customers, right? So I've always learned that if I go and support somebody, the first thing I do is I find out what their objectives are. Not my objectives, what their objectives are. And I kind of reflect my objectives on theirs, because if you're a true business partner, you've got to be out to achieve your partner's goals. Yeah. So, for example, in Travelport, the CFO brought me in to understand the investment side of the business, and he was spending hundreds of millions a year, didn't know what he got from it, etc. But the first thing I did when I joined, I sat down with the chief marketing officer. I said, "Can I have a copy of your objectives?" And they said, "Oh, Yeah, that's quite unusual. Why do you want that? I said, because I'm your business partner, finance business partner, and I want my objectives to reflect your objectives, because my success is you being successful. And that blew her mind. That's the first time someone in finance had talked to her like that. That, wow. So you're going to help me do what I want to do, not just this bit in finance, but what I'm trying to do. Yeah, that's what I'm going to partner with, and I'm going to do the best I can to do that. So I'd say the biggest challenge is building that relationship and making sure that you understand, parts of the business that you're responsible for. Okay. And not just kind of objectives, but also understand how it operates in an organization. You can't join the dots until you understand how an organization operates. So most of the organizations I've worked for, when I've left, I know exactly how they operate. I know what levers they are, what the right KPIs are, etc. Because you need to get that understanding. I think the other challenge is, particularly when one thing that did surprise me with Microsoft is, when you've got all this information that's available to everyone, sometimes it can be challenging to get a seat at the table, because if sales and marketing have got this access to the same data as you and insight, they'll say, well, why do I need somebody from finance? You're redundant now. But where you play your part is you're saying, yeah, but you don't understand commercial finance. You don't understand how you get the best rate of return on something. That's what I want to play a part in. When you make those decisions, are you making it, so you get the biggest bang for your buck, etc. So it's basically making sure, it comes back to this educational part, is educating other parts of the business in commercial finance, i.e., pricing, investment decisions, all those things that they traditionally made themselves. You can support them in doing that to show, okay, well, these are the options. This is what's likely to happen if you do this and this, etc.
No, definitely. I completely agree. I've helped businesses do, product market mix optimization just to make sure that actually they make more revenue, more profit on the bottom line because your mix is optimized. Now that's not something marketing teams will always focus on because they are just trying to grow the business. But, I was like, no, mate, it's about the bottom line. I get your top line, but it's about the bottom line. The bottom line pays your and my salary, not the top line.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, so could you share some of the best practices a business partner could adopt to support and influence decision making? How do you get a chair on the big boys table?
Yeah, I suppose I've kind of mentioned it just in the last couple of minutes, that one of the best things is having a growth mindset. So just the way you think about things, that's really important. Recognizing that your technical skills are invaluable when it comes to commercial finance, understanding the business of finance, because the people that you're supporting, most people don't. They don't understand how that turns into that and that. But that's your strength that you can bring to the party. The other thing is about educating the people you're working with so that they see it from your perspective as well as theirs, ultimately. Because, like I said, when you go into different functions, you see things in a different perspective, through a different lens. People are trying to achieve the same thing. They just think about things differently. So recognizing that as well, recognizing that people think differently to finance people. A technology person or a product person think in a different way, which is fine, because that's a skill set. It's just recognizing how they think like that and appreciating that. And the thing I've already mentioned is about developing, and I'll repeat it, EQ skills. I don't think enough finance people have enough what I call soft skills. So if anything, I would say that's probably one area that finance community in general needs to develop. Once you've got your technical skills, you're a qualified accountant, if you're going to make an impact on the business, even with a company that's got all the technology like Microsoft, you still need people skills, because
Absolutely.
people make decisions. Technology's brought the insight to help them make decisions, but it's the people that make the decisions. So ultimately, you've got to deal with people, how they operate and how they think, etc. So if there was anything I'd say, people listening, if you want to develop your key, and is think about how you can develop your EQ skills, your softer skills, emotional intelligence skills.
That is valuable advice. I completely agree with that one. Very early on in my career, I did burn a few bridges because I was being a hard headed finance person. But then I learned that actually to survive and to grow, I need all these people around me to work with them so that we can all grow together. Otherwise,
Yeah.
I'm just going to burn bridges
I've
and
been there
go.
as well. In my early days, I burnt a lot of relationships and things because you had that hard finance hat on. But
Exactly.
I learned over the years that that doesn't move things forward, basically. So
Yeah, it's better to make friends than enemies,
yeah,
basically.
exactly.
So yeah, no, absolutely. No, so okay, Andy, now the last three questions, right? The last three standard questions we're asking all our guests. So where do you think is the future of FP&A and finance business partners in 3 to 5 years? You are not allowed to say AI. I am saying that to
Yeah.
everybody. No AI.
So I'd say the future of FP&A is more business partnering,
Okay.
and I'll give you that example with Microsoft. So in Microsoft, over the last 10 years, the amount of finance people hasn't changed numbers wise. So it's around about 3,300, something like that. But the amount of people working in the organization is doubled, maybe trebled in that time, etc. And that's because they've kind of focused on what's important to the business with all this technology around. And most of that is around business partnering. So when I in outside the mothership in the UK, where you got the traditional, tax functions, treasury functions, all the regional things, whether it's UK, wherever, they're predominantly senior business people. So you have a CFO and you have 6 or 7 senior business partners, and you might have one financial controller. You know, so their model is very much about business partnering. So I would say as more companies adopt technology, you'll find that financial planning and analysis, all the analysis will be done by technology. Even some of the planning will be done by technology. And so,
Predictive forecasting, man.
yeah, what you're left with is that financial insight that you can support the business with, and it's not about just, I've reported this and this is what's happening at the moment. It's about looking forward and thinking about, well, where's that taken us? So when you have that meeting each month, you're not just talking about, oh, this is up, that's down, whatever. You can say, well, if we carry on in this direction, that's going to happen. By the way, this has happened in the marketplace. Maybe we should do this. So the FP&A becomes more of recommendations and helping with the decision making, as opposed to financial reporting and analysis of historic things. So I didn't mention that. I didn't mention AI at all there.
No, that is perfect. And I think so too. I mean, I think technology will act as an enabler, but you will need people to still interpret it and make decisions out of it.
Yeah. So going back to Microsoft, because as far as I'm concerned, that's where most companies are going to end up in probably 10 years' time. Their budgeting process is 2 weeks. I mean, I've been in company budget process going for a whole year. Their forecasting is a couple of days. So, and when I was there a few years ago, they were using generative AI rather than the AI, that's out now. But so the predictive AI rather than generative AI that's out now. But their systems are already doing a lot of the work. So basically, business partners were tweaking around the edges. So they'd say, well, this is your budget for next year, or this is your forecast. Is there anything that looks a bit abnormal? Because in the background, with this big database, all these algorithms were saying, right, okay, this, and that's far more accurate than someone sat in a room. What do you think next year's going to do? So that all disappeared. So what that allows you to do is say, okay, with what I know at the moment, what the that's not in the data, like, I don't know, this contract's just about to be signed, or we're just about to lose that customer, whatever, you can tweak it, but the framework is there to provide you with the starting point, rather than FP&A going through all that process to build it and all those iterations. You've been there, all those iterations of the budget and the forecast, and everybody loses the will to live at the end, don't they? And they just say, okay, well, that's it. But that disappears because in Microsoft that's your starting point. You ain't got 3 months to think about it. You got a couple of days. Where do we need to tweak it? We'll agree that. Job done. Move on. Let's run the business. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I did at Unilever, I remember I was at Unilever for basically almost 10 months. And I said, you know what? Business needs to spend time running the business. Their job is not to do a budget. A budget cycle, even a forecast cycle was like 2 months, right? 2 to 3 months.
It's too long. It kind of consumes the business, doesn't it?
How is that productive? And that forecast or budget, respectfully, after the minute it is signed off, it is worthless
Yeah,
because the values have changed, the business environment
exactly,
has changed, taxes have changed. I'm like, why are
exactly.
you doing this for two
And
months?
that's another. Just reminded me. That's another good point about going down the technology route and collecting this data. Is you can start to see things in real time. So you don't have that lag in terms of when you're reporting the history. You can actually see it on the day, what's happening on this particular day. And that's really important as well, because you don't have any lag in, oh, well, that was 2 months ago or this like this. Your data's changing on a daily basis. And real time data is important in doing that. So, yeah.
Okay, what do you think that FP&A functions need help with today, in your opinion, and to become basically better strategic finance business partner? So obviously you've talked about EQ quite extensively. So I guess EQ is one thing that they need, but what is one thing other than EQ that they need to become better strategic finance business partners?
An understanding of the business,
Okay, I agree.
a really good understanding of the business to the point, like I said, you're joining the dots. So, you aren't there just to give them a report, which is what I said, it's this, adding the dots up. You're actually joining them and you're saying, actually, that's part of the business is doing that. Is that right? If we're trying to do this over here, etc., and play that role, and challenge sometimes and say, I've spent a lot of my life challenging. I don't know all the answers, but I'm quite happy to challenge. I don't sit there and say yes or no. I'll go and do a report and stuff. I'm an active part in the conversation, as in, well, is that the right thing to do? And why are we doing that? And be brave. So basically, be brave to be bold. Basically, you know, you can do it in a way where you're asking questions and to say, the senior people have like looked at me and thought, oh, who's he? Like this, and I'm saying, look, at the end of the day, I always ask myself if would I do this if it was my money, right? And if I wouldn't, I wouldn't, and I would only recommend to you what I'd recommend when I do with my own money, And one thing you'll be clear from me is my recommendation to you. You can, someone senior, you can say, well, you can do what you like. You can overrule me and do whatever you want. But one thing is this is my recommendation, this or this or this, and I recommend this. But if you don't agree and you want to do something else, you're the boss, you go and do that. But you've always got to be brave enough to stand by your convictions, because 9 times out of 10 times people will think, actually, he's got a point. Well, the one thing I've found in my life is that the really stupid questions that people don't want to ask are the best questions.
Oh my God. Oh my God. That used to be a phrase when I was in a job. I was like, I don't have all the answers, but I ask you the right question. I don't need to have all the answers. And I think far too many finance people feel the pressure that they have to have the answer.
Yeah.
And I think you don't.
You don't need
No.
to have the answers. You need to have the right questions
Yeah, absolutely.
and ask the right questions at all levels. Don't be frightened. If you've got to have conviction to make a recommendation. Too many people go to senior people and say, well, there's your report. It is what it is. But no, you've got to be there making recommendations. And if they come back with something, you've got to stand your ground and say, no, I think it's this and this. And, they might overrule you, or they might just say, that's a bloody good thing. Let's go and have a look at it and something like that. But so I'd say you've got to be more bold and have a conviction on what you're trying to recommend, and by doing that, you're going to get recognized more.
I agree. I mean, a lot of my promotions in my life came out of the fact that I was asking some of the most difficult questions which nobody else was asking. I mean, I didn't provide answers. Honestly, I will put my hand up first and say, I didn't have the answer because I am
Yeah.
not an engineering expert or I am not a demand planning
Yep.
expert or a manufacturing expert. And I don't want to be either, very respectful.
Yeah.
But I ask those people the right questions and then help them join the dots that you are saying this, but this is what that marketing is doing this, but R&D is doing that, and sales is doing this. Are you all making sense? Kind
Exactly.
of thing. And then suddenly people are like, oh my God, who is this guy?
Yes. Asking all these questions.
Exactly. And it makes sense. So no, completely. Okay. So for someone who is looking forward to moving into FP&A or who's starting out in FP&A, right? Is there any skills or certification you'd recommend them for them to do?
Yeah. So I'm biased, so I'd say SEMA as a kind of financial skill, and the reason being it's always been focused on management accounting, so it's always been about supporting the business. So going back to all this technology, what does it ultimately do? It helps you to free up your time to do other things, and other things actually supporting the business. So I know I'm a SEMA person, but if you're an FP&A person, you want to get that more management account experience, because that's where the future's going. It's not about reporting. That's taken up by the technology. So I'd say SEMA qualification, EQ skills that I've mentioned, and get experience in that and do like courses. And then this has got look kind of a little bit controversial, but what I actually found in Microsoft is in some cases they weren't actually employing finance people. They were employing data scientists, and now more so AI, people. And the reason being is when you've got a massive database of data, there's a skill in understanding the signals that data is providing to you. Yeah. It's not about, that's up, down, that's a down. All those algorithms are providing signals, good or bad or indifferent, as they flow through the data. And a data scientist, or people who understand that, are more likely to see those signals. And it's that insight that drives better decisions. So in Microsoft, they're already thinking, okay, well, actually, I don't need to take on a traditional accountant. I actually need somebody with these skills in the finance. They're still working in the finance department, but that's what they're doing. They're looking at all those signals in the data.
I have to add, I apologize, but I have to add, I was literally last week talking to somebody. I cannot obviously name the company or the person, but the guy is a group head of FP&A for their UK entity. And so he's a head of FP&A. I am not exaggerating, Andy. He's got 4 data scientists in his team and only 2 finance business partners. So the 4 data scientists are enabling the entire business to have visibility of the data, visualization of the data, trending, blah blah blah, predictive forecasting, all those kind of activities. These 4 guys are taking care of.
Yep.
And then the 2 finance business partners are then taking that and helping the business make better business decisions and things like that. So you're absolutely right. If somebody wants to do this after SEMA, they should definitely look at finance, being a data scientist or a data engineer or something like that.
I wouldn't wait for SEMA or any other, body to do it, because they tend to be quite slow in changing the educational syllabus. I would actually go out and do some courses and just drive your own development.
Yeah, no, but I don't think if SEMA should do it either. So SEMA is good at management accounting. You do management accounting. You don't try to become an IT trainer.
Yeah.
And there are IT trainers who do IT training. They don't teach you accounting, and let them do that, right? I mean, let the 2 institutes not merge themselves, and people can then make what they want out of it. No, that was really, really a wonderful session. I really enjoyed it, as I thoroughly expected I would. So I hope you had a good time as well. Thank you so much, Andy. Any closing thoughts?
I would just say technology is there to help you and support you. And as long as you accept change and get comfortable with change, that's the important thing, getting comfortable with change. Just embrace it and see where it takes you. And it will take you to a better place in terms of, the productivity of yourself plus the companies that you work for.
Thank you so much, Andy. Thanks a lot. I really, really appreciate